thank you for joining us on what has turned out to be a pretty dramatic day here. Let's talk about first, should the U.S. and should the State Department pull this funding from countries like Libya that are doing very inhumane things to their own people?
I'm going to leave that to a high pay grade than me, to the President and the Secretary of State and those folks, and let them, they're a lot closer to this, and let them tell us what they believe, what they'd recommend that we do. I would say this, as a nation that's the beacon of hope and freedom and liberty for a lot of the rest of the world, I think we need to be true to our principles and try to use what pressure, what influence we have to support people who are trying to overthrow a tyranny as they are in Libya and other places in that part of the world.
Well, let me ask specifically about another suggestion, which is to create a no-fly zone. There are reports that Gaddafi used his jets to strafe the protesters. A lot of folks are suggesting that we, as a nation, should call, whether in the UN or some other body, for a no-fly zone over Libya so we could prevent him from doing that again. This is a guy, after all, who has killed American citizens directly. So we should, whether you're a senator, a congressman, or a State Department official, you should have a position on the future of this guy.
I'm an old naval flight officer, served in 3 tours in Southeast Asia. I've certainly supported the idea of a no-fly zone in Iraq when Saddam Hussein was the leader there. This sounds like a pretty reasonable approach. Let me just say, though, I think there's plenty of adversity right here. There's a guy named Albert Einstein who probably never thought much about these issues, but he used to say, in adversity lies opportunity. And there's plenty of adversity here. What we have to do is to be smart enough, set aside the no-fly zones and all that stuff. We have to be thinking about the long term. We have to be thinking, how do we move ourselves away from this dependence on foreign oil? Right. How do we make sure that the cars, trucks, vans that we're making are more energy efficient, that the fuel that we fuel them with can come from nuclear power, it can come from electricity generated by offshore wind. That's the kind of thing. That's what we really ought to be focused on. And it's all well and good that we're in this tumult and uproar today, but we have to keep our eye on the ball for the long run. And we don't always do that. We get through one of these dilemmas and we forget about the national security consequences. We can't continue to forget that.
Well, the Arab oil shock in the 70s is a perfect example of a blown opportunity, Senator. You're probably right on that issue. You know, the U.S. has had this longstanding policy.
What did Harry Truman used to say, Liz? Yeah, Harry Truman used to say, the only thing that's new in the world is the history we forgot or never learned. Yeah. And we need to start learning our lesson and move away from our dependence on this foreign oil. We take all this money from the U.S., we send it to places overseas, we give it to people who don't have our interest in mind, and sometimes use our money to hurt us. How foolish can we be?
Well, exactly, which brings me to my next point, and that is that the U.S. has had this long-standing policy of supporting authoritarian regimes in the Mideast in the name of stability, which clearly for a long time worked for Egypt. But, you know, do we get rid of that now? How are these democratic uprisings changing that equation and U.S. foreign policy in general?
Well, I actually met President Mubarak, I think 2 years into his presidency, and the person that he was there then, compared to the person he became over 30 years, a lot of change. And sometimes we see it in our own country, where people who are elected to be the servant, they forget who the servant is. It's supposed to be us. And sometimes we forget and believe that we're the one to be served. And clearly that's happened in Egypt, and it's happened in a bunch of these other countries as well. We need to use our influence, whatever it might be, that bully pulpit, to the extent that military sales, foreign aid is appropriate and can be used as a tool. We need to use all those tools in our toolbox. The other thing that we need to have is a strong, fully supported, full-up strategic oil reserve, so that when petroleum reserves, so that when we have a bump like this, if OPEC can't respond, the Saudis can't respond quickly enough and pump up production, we have our own reserves, and the folks in
Senator,
Europe have
let me
just,
we're running short on time, but I have to get you on the question of domestic drilling and domestic, whether it's offshore or in Anwar or anywhere else, or whether it's coal, trying to get what we need from coal. Fadel Gate, who's one of the best oil analysts in the world, said we could be 100% independent in 10 years if we totally released our coal, oil, and gas reserves. What do you think?
For the time being, we need oil. For the time being, we need coal. We need clean coal, much cleaner coal. We also need nuclear. We need to move as fast as we can toward offshore wind and toward more energy-efficient cars, trucks, and vans. The cleanest, most affordable form of energy is the energy we never use, and we have to keep that in mind.
Good to see you, Senator. Thank you for joining us. Senator Tom Carper,
Thank you.
Democrat of Delaware.